May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, friends, I want to invite us to look at something. I'm going to share my screen here. And this is a painting from 1633 by Rembrandt. And it is called, let me see if I can zoom in here and make it, hopefully you guys can see this whole thing. 1 second. Okay. Can you guys just give me a thumbs up that you can see this? Okay, great. So this is a painting called Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt. And what's sad about this painting is that it was actually stolen from a museum in Boston in 1990. It was part of one of the biggest museum heists in America, if not the biggest, where 12 famous paintings were stolen. But this one is really special because it depicts the story that Anne just read. And I want to just point a couple of things out that I find really interesting. And you'll kind of, maybe it's a little dark for you as well, but you won't be able to see this. But Jesus is here, you have where I'm pointing is, I'll zoom in a little bit for us, reclining on a cushion. You guys see that little cushion? I love this guy right here. He's like explaining to Jesus what's going on. He's like, so here's the thing, Jesus. We're in a storm, and he's just talking to him as though it's not obvious. This guy's reaching over to wake Jesus. This one is one of my favorites. You see this guy over here looking green? He's puking over the side of the boat, which you can imagine in a big sea storm, somebody's going to get sick. Also, you'll notice one of the artistic pieces here is that Rembrandt has the part of the boat where Jesus is in the stern is kind of calm and it's steady. Where the storm is happening is on the front of the boat, and that's where it's really raging. So it's almost like he's sending a message that the calm is where on Jesus' side, and Jesus even has a little bit of a kind of light over his head, like a halo. So over here, interestingly, is Rembrandt. So Rembrandt has put himself in the painting. So if you were to actually count all of the players in this painting, you'll find Jesus, you'll find 12 disciples, plus a 13th person. And it's not too uncommon for painters of the period to do this. There's another image, another painting where at the crucifixion where Rembrandt put himself in as one of the people crucifying Jesus, which is interesting. But here's Rembrandt, and he's looking right at us. And it's almost as though he's saying, where are you in this story? Like, where would you put yourself in this story, in the story of the storm on the Sea of Galilee? So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But where would you put yourself in the story? The story of Jesus calming the storm. But before that, when the storm is raging, are you the person in the bow where you saw like hoisting the sails or dropping them or whatever you're doing? Like, are you the person that jumps immediately into action to stabilize the situation when you're in a storm? Are you the person who turns to prayer? Are you one of those disciples in the stern who's waking Jesus up and saying, wake up? Or the other one that's saying, don't you care that we are perishing? Are you the person that turns to prayer? Are you the one who is like explaining, that intellectual, the guy with like his hands up, like, here, Jesus, here's the thing. We're in a storm, if you haven't noticed, and we're just trying to figure out where the storm originated and if you could do something about it. Are you the person who tries to understand and intellectualize the storm? Are you the person when you go through the metaphorical storms in your life, not just the literal ones, but the ones where you're overwhelmed in life? Are you the one who's puking over the side? Or the one who's just, I can't handle this kind of pressure? How do you typically respond to storms in your life? Literal ones, metaphorical ones. Maybe you can identify with all of the above in varying degrees. Well, a couple of years ago, when Hershey announced that she was going to be moving for personal reasons, family reasons, and it made a lot of sense for her. I would have done the exact same thing. I actually found myself in a place of great overwhelm, and the background story to this is that St. John's had our church school had gone through a huge transition when Nancy Durr retired. And we actually saw our numbers, our church school numbers, drop over the next year. And then when we hired Hershey, who was truly remarkable, and we were so excited for a chance for our church school to recover. But as you know, it takes time to get to know the church school program and for people to get to know you and to start to build. And it's easier to lose people than to gain them back. So right around the time that Hershey had been here for about a year, just a little over a year, when we're thinking, okay, this is the time where there might be a resurgence, is when Hershey needed to leave. And so I was sitting here going, I'm not sure our church school can take another hit. And I remember feeling like I don't even know what the future of the church school is going to look like. So I called the bishop and I said, Bishop, I need to talk to you. And this is what she said to me, because I was trying to think about, what do you do? How do you fix the situation, or what's the next step? Because it takes time to hire staff and all of this kind of stuff. And Bishop Marianne said to me, Sari, you're in a storm right now. What do you do when you're in a storm? She just broke it down for me. And I remember thinking, okay, the first thing you do when you're in a storm is you make sure that everyone is out of harm's way, right? You make sure that you get everybody to safety first. Before you think about what do we do next, make sure everyone's out of harm's way. And that was the first step. So that began for me this kind of like infrastructuring. Okay, how do you tell people that we're losing our associate for church, for Christian formation? How do you make people feel like we're not going to fall apart? And then you start to infrastructure the next step. So it was such a helpful metaphor. You're in a storm. What do you do when you're in a storm? It just breaks it down. It brings it to the basic components. So how do you typically respond to storms in your life? And this is a question I'm asking you. I'm not going to answer this for each of us, but I'm asking you, your personality, even maybe you're going through a storm right now in your life, personally, professionally, relationally, where you feel a sense of panic or distress or overwhelm or fear. How do you typically respond to the storms in your life? If you were on that boat with Jesus, where would you put yourself on that boat? Now I want to show you, I want to go back to this image, because I want to show you where Rembrandt put himself. If you'll notice, he's right in the middle of the boat, and he's right here between where the calm is, where we might say faith, and over here where the craziness is going, where we will call doubt. And I'm not making up these two categories. This is a part of some of the commentaries that have been written about this piece, is that he's placing himself in the middle between faith and doubt. And Jesus, even in the story, says to his disciples, you of little faith, why did you doubt? So really this question about faith comes up in the story. So here it is, Rembrandt, that's where he envisions himself in a storm, wavering between faith and doubt. And this is where we, I think, return once again to the central question, is what does it mean to have faith? Especially when you are in the middle of a storm. What does it mean to have faith? Because we can say, oh yeah, here he is teetering between faith and doubt. We all have a sense that we've been there in those places where we trust and then we really don't trust. So what does it mean to have faith? One thing that's really interesting about this word faith in English is that it actually does not capture the intention of the word that is used in Greek when Jesus uses the word pistis. And pistis is actually a verb, and it can be used as a noun. In English, when we talk about faith, it's actually just a noun, right? It's a noun. So when you talk about having faith, you don't say I'm faithing, you say I'm having faith. So it's like if you think about a pen or this mouse, this computer mouse. I have a computer mouse. So I either have one or I don't have one, right? So when we talk about having something like faith, it sends this message like you either have faith or you don't have faith, which is unfortunate because in the Greek, the word pistis is that pistis is the noun, but pistio is the verb. So you can faith something. You can faith in something, or you can, in a certain context, you can have levels of faithing. And it really changes things, because then all of a sudden you realize that there can be certain situations where you have more faith and other situations where you have less faith. It's not like you have it all the time or you don't have it. And so there are degrees to this. And so where Rembrandt places himself in the center isn't actually like he's choosing whether or not to have it. He is actually expressing a degree in certain storms that in his life, degree to which he does have faith in that moment or not. And so the verb of faith is so much more relatable, connective, I think, for all of us. This is a very simple sermon today, in that I want to end today with a story, and this story is by Pastor Martin Copenhaver, and he talks about an experience of what it means to have this sense of faith, but as an action and not so much just as something that you possess or don't possess. And then we'll go straight from this into the Agape Creed today. And as I read this, I want to invite you to contemplate your own experiences of storms in your life and how this message today might help you in that journey. God insists on having the very last word, and that is always a word of hope, of reconciliation, of healing, of goodness, and of life. God insists on having the very last word. On occasion, I have had to hold on to this affirmation in the way that I would clutch a life preserver while bobbing about in a stormy sea. One such occasion was a particular hospital visit I made early in my ministry, when I visited Dorothy, a beloved member of our church. Her doctor had just left the room, leaving a dark cloud behind him. Even a young minister like me could not miss it. Dorothy was an actress with a big personality who was used to commanding a room, but not this room, and not now. She said in a voice softer than I had ever heard her use, "Have a seat, Martin. We've just gotten some difficult news." I perched on one side of her hospital bed, and her husband, Ed, sat on the other side. Then the two of them relayed some of what they had just learned, news that they themselves could not yet begin to take in fully. Dorothy's cancer had recurred after years of remission. A most unwelcome visitor was back. Treatment would begin the following week. For a moment, the three of us sat in silence while contraptions connected to Dorothy with wires and tubes continued a steady rhythm of drip and pulse and beat. Then Dorothy, looking straight at Ed, said, "I'll be okay." Ed replied with his deeply soothing voice, "I know you will be, Dorothy. The doctors assure me that you will." "No, Ed," she said, her voice gaining in strength. "I mean, I will be okay either way." She did not elaborate, but of course, what she meant was that she would be okay if she lived and okay if she died. Gratefully, Dorothy ended up living quite a number of years longer, but that was hardly certain on that day or on any of the days that followed. You never know what a day may hold, which means you need to know something else, which Dorothy did. I've thought back on that brief exchange so many times. From that time on, I began to see that there are two ways to provide reassurance in the presence of fear. One form of reassurance is to say that everything will be all right. The surgery will be successful. The relationship will be mended. The storm will pass. Your worst fears will not be realized. But there are few circumstances when that kind of reassurance is actually ours to give. The other form of reassurance is to say that if we hold fast to the love of God, come what may, God will remain and not let us go. God gets the last word, or as Dorothy put it, I will be okay either way. It is that kind of faith, I think, that Jesus was looking for from his friends, even in the midst of a most terrible storm. Let's turn together now